Hello and welcome to the Beaver County Auto Studios. This is the Friday football show on Pittsburgh Sports Live. I'm Alan Saunders. We're going to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have an important AFC North divisional matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals this Sunday at 1 o'clock. We'll touch on the Pitt Panthers, who will visit Notre Dame, the number 5 team in the country, Saturday afternoon. We'll also touch on an FCS matchup, the local matchup between Duquesne and Robert Morris on the Bluff, Saturday at 7:30. And we'll also talk a little bit about some college football on the macro scale, some things that have happened in the news this week that I kind of wanted to bring up. The first thing we're going to do this Friday, as we do every Friday, is we talk about what we got wrong and what we got right from the previous week. And the Steelers beat the Atlanta Falcons at Heinz Field. And the big thing to me was that the Steelers offense got back to looking like itself. James Conner had a huge game. Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown got off to kind of a slow start, but it looked like they were able to build up to the same connection that we're used to seeing from those two players. And just the kind of game that the Steelers offense we've come to expect from that unit over the last few years. Certainly, I think all good signs for the future for that unit, especially against, what is a pretty talented Cincinnati Bengals defense, particularly up front, where I think they have one of the better defensive lines in the league, certainly one of the more underrated defensive lines in the league. But I just think if the Steelers offense is operating the way it can, there aren't really very many defenses, Cincinnati's included, that can stop it. And it seems like last week, at least, they were operating at that level that they're capable of. Will they moving forward? It's hard to say. They've been somewhat inconsistent this season. Didn't have a good game against Cleveland. Didn't have a good game against Baltimore. But then again, those teams played each other last week and didn't score a touchdown between them. So maybe Cleveland and Baltimore just have good defenses too. I don't know. But I think it's reasonable to expect another good game from the Pittsburgh Steelers offense. And I think if they get that, they're going to get a win against the Bengals. Ben Roethlisberger's always done very well at Paul Brown Stadium. The Steelers have done well there, along with Ben Roethlisberger, for quite some time. But to me, it's all about the matchups on the defense. The Steelers' defense can be taken advantage of by teams that have specific matchup problems, specifically against the safeties and the linebackers. I feel like we've talked about it every single week. But you look over at the Cincinnati Bengals, they don't appear to be that team. They don't have Tyler Eifert, their pass-catching tight end, who it seems like is hurt every season, and he's hurt again. They don't have Giovanni Bernard, who's an explosive pass-catching back out of the backfield. He's out for a few weeks with some kind of knee strain, I believe. And so they've got Joe Mixon, who's a good running back, but he's not the same kind of explosive perimeter player that Bernard is. And they've got A.J. Green, who's one of the better wide receivers in the entire NFL. But the Steelers have shown the ability to take away one elite outside receiver. I felt like Joe Hayden defended Julio Jones very well last week. He's probably going to get that matchup again this week. I looked up his numbers against Green. They actually haven't played each other all that often, despite spending their entire career in the same division. Last year, Hayden played the Bengals once. Green had 3 catches for 41 yards. The last time they faced was 2014. Green had 5 catches for 49 yards. I think Joe Hayden can cover A.J. Green. He's not going to blanket him. He's not going to keep him from ever getting the ball. But I think he could keep him from being a big difference maker in the game for the Bengals. And that's really it for as far as the Cincinnati offense. I mean, the other big matchup, I think, for the Steelers is going to be finding a guy to cover Tyler Boyd, because the Bengals have moved the former Pitt and Clareton wide receiver around a good bit. And the Steelers' depth at cornerback hasn't been great. They're rotating Cody Sensabaugh and Artie Burns at the other starting corner spot. They've got Mike Hilton, who's been good in the slot, but he's playing a bit banged up, still coming back from that elbow injury. And so I think that's the one way that I feel like the Bengals can beat the Steelers, schematically anyway. And then there's just Mixon, who's a talented running back, uses his lower half really well. He's not the kind of guy that you're going to get a lot of negative plays against. So the Bengals aren't going to be sitting in 3rd and 10 all day. They're going to be in 2nd and medium and 3rd and short a good bit if they can lean on Mixon to get some tough yardage. And that makes it harder to stop those big receivers for the Steelers secondary. But it's certainly not a task that they can't overcome. It's not an offense where the Steelers just don't have the pieces to match up with it. They do. They can stop the Bengals offense, and I expect them to. So we'll put that out on a limb there. I think the Steelers are going to win this week. I'm not a huge prediction guy, and I'm not very good at it when I do. So don't place any bets. But I don't think the Bengals are a particularly terrifying matchup for the Steelers, and I think it's a game the Steelers should win. Let's put it that way. Let's move on to the collegiate game real quick. And the first thing I want to talk about is officiating. I feel like every college football fan hates their conference's officials pretty much equally. There's like 65 Power 5 teams thereabouts. I think they all think that their conference has the worst officials and that their conference officials are out to get their school. And they're not. Well, I mean, at least not all of them. Maybe some of them. I don't know. But they're certainly not out to get all of them. They're just bad. They're really, really bad. And the replay system that most of the conferences have developed seems to work pretty well. But there's a big screw up from the Pac-12 this week where a conference official actually overruled the video review replay official in the conference command center when they called from the game to take a look at a targeting call. They clearly made the wrong decision, and that conference official was not a trained referee. It's just a conference suit who overruled the official in the room and the officials on the field. That's not the way it's supposed to go. The Pac-12 commissioner came out this week and said so. But just to me, it just shows the fundamental problem with college football officiating is that by segregating all of the officials into tiny little groups and each conference having slightly different rules and their own command structure, and it's decentralized and it doesn't work. There doesn't need to be a room where there could be a Pac-12 suit that can say, no, leave that Southern California player in, that was not targeting. That should never be a thing that could possibly happen. There needs to be more centralized control over the officiating in college football, from standardizing the rules from conference to conference and the procedures for replay, to just having a national pool of officials that can be held to one standard and accountable by an independent agency that's not able to be controlled by the whims of one conference or another. There was a former Miami Marlins executive that came out and said this week, look, Major League Baseball is going to try to screw the Milwaukee Brewers. They're going to try to have the Dodgers advance. Listen, maybe that's true and maybe it's not. But you're always going to hear about things like that when the officiating structure is not removed from the marketing structure of the organization. Now, I think Major League Baseball does a pretty good job of that. The umpires have their own union that they're responsible to primarily before they're responsible to Major League Baseball, and I feel very confident that the umpires union would have a lot of pushback on that idea that they're going to allow Major League Baseball to supersede their integrity and supersede the integrity of the game. College football doesn't have that. It doesn't have this national union for officials where they can have their own standard that they want to be held to and would not let someone that's outside of that process interfere with it. I think it's beyond time that college football nationalizes the officiating, and it would also help professionalize the officiating. I think if there was the ability for the very best referees in the country to work more games, to work more of the high-profile games, maybe the very best officiating crew doesn't ever get put together because the best referee works for the Big Ten and the best linesman is in the ACC and the best back judge is in the Pac-12, and they never get very good officiating crews together because the talent is so spread out. And so I think that's a common sense change that needs to be made at the NCAA level, and just, the conferences don't have to like it. They don't have to vote for it. Somebody at the NCAA needs to be in front of this and say, this is a bad thing for the sport, and this is a way that college football can be better than the NFL. Everybody hates the NFL product right now, mostly because of the way the game is officiated. I think college football is doing a better job with some of those things, but this is clearly an area where they could improve and actually make that a strength of the product, to say that they have better officiating, their officiating is better organized, smoother, cleaner, faster processes that allow the game to take place without the guys in striped shirts dominating the television. I think that's what most fans want. That's what viewers want. And I think college football is in a unique position to be able to provide that at a better level than the NFL right now, just simply because of the way they've gone about some of their rule changes and things like that have been less judgment-based, and also the ability to include video review in some of those judgment calls, which the National Football League referees do not have the ability to do. That's my soapbox. Let me know what you think. You can comment below, and also while you're down there, hit that subscribe button. We really appreciate everyone subscribing to the channel. It really helps everything we're trying to do here at Pittsburgh Sports Live. All right, now we'll go from sort of generic college football to specifically talking about the University of Pittsburgh, as the Panthers are on their way to, or probably already are in, South Bend, Indiana, depending on when you're listening to this, as they prepare to face number 5 at Notre Dame this weekend. It's going to be a tough matchup for the Panthers, no doubt. Notre Dame is a top team for good reason, but to me, this feels different than the Panthers' other 2 games against highly ranked opponents this season. When Pitt played Penn State, I actually thought the Panthers had a chance in that game. They did not. They lost 51-6, mostly because they didn't play a particularly good game. When Pitt played Central Florida and lost 45-14, I think it was evident to anyone that had broken down the film of those 2 teams that the Pitt defense just did not have the ability to play with Central Florida because of the scheme they run and because of the talent level of that defense compared to the UCF offense. Just too many athletes. When you look at Notre Dame, though, it's going to be a different kind of a football game. You know, Notre Dame does a lot of the same things on offense that Pitt likes to do. They like to run the ball. They do use an RPO, but a lot of their passing game is short passes. They get their quarterback Ian Book out on the perimeter to make plays, just like Kenny Pickett does. It's not some sort of stylistic mismatch. Yes, I believe Notre Dame has better players, particularly places like defensive line, wide receiver, linebacker, and quarterback maybe. But it's not the kind of game where you can't envision a Pitt upset. I think if Pitt plays really, really well, they could run right with Notre Dame, and then you get to the end game scenarios and crazy things happen. You never know. But I don't think this is the kind of game that Pitt can't win, that Pitt should feel like they can't win. And talking to the players on the South Side this week, that was the very strong message that, look, Quadri Ollison said, respect all, fear none. And Jimmy Morrissey said, I don't want to be known as a giant killer. I want to be known as a giant. They're not looking at this game as some sort of massive upset or some sort of insurmountable odds. They're just looking at it as this Saturday's game, and I think that's a healthy attitude. If I were a betting man, I think I would still lean towards the Irish, but I think Pitt is in a much better place. Both from just coming off a win against Syracuse to the changes they've made to their defense by adding the nickel. And, I think they're in a better place stylistically against Notre Dame to pull off an upset than they have been against their previous 2 highly ranked opponents. That being said, they certainly do have some adversity to overcome. Pitt lost starting linebacker Quentin Wirginis to a season-ending knee injury on Tuesday. They also lost starting tight end Tyler Sear, who stepped away from the team for personal reasons. That's according to team official on Tuesday. Pittsburgh Sports Now, myself and my colleague Mike Vukovcan have reported that it was due to an argument over his usage in the Pitt offense. Whatever the reason, Pitt's not going to have its starting tight end. It's not going to have its starting middle linebacker, and it seems like they probably won't have starting wide receiver Taysir Mack, who missed last week's game against Syracuse after being injured against Central Florida. That's 3 pretty important pieces for the Panthers, and they're not particularly well equipped to replace them all. Saw last week, Maurice French has stepped up a bit, but they still are really looking for some other options in that passing game. Rafael Rougeau-Lopes is more of a slot guy. He's not going to replace a Taysier Mack on the outside. Aaron Matthews played well against the Orange, but it was mostly in a blocking role. He didn't really replicate Mack's downfield presence in the offense, and he certainly is a guy that has the speed and the size to do so. He's about 6'5", long arms, very physical player. He's one of the best blocking wide receivers I can ever remember Pitt having. In fact, I've had people suggest to me on Twitter, and I don't think it's totally outrageous, that whether it's he moves to tight end or just he sort of replaces that role in the offense as a near to the line of scrimmage blocker / pass catcher, I think that makes a lot of sense for Aaron Matthews to get a lot of the bulk, to pick up a lot of the bulk of the playing time that'll be there from Tyler Sears' absence. But they still need another receiver. They need a guy like Shockey Jacques-Louis, freshman, I know, going through it at this point of the year, I'm sure, as most freshmen are, playing a long season with more intense and physical practices and workouts than they have ever before. But they need a guy like him or Dontavius Butler-Jenkins to step up and start making some plays on the outside. And they need Kenny Pickett and the offensive line to play better. I wrote this week about Pitt's pass protection. It's not been good enough, and it's been multifaceted, the failures. The receivers aren't getting off their jams and into their routes quick enough. Pickett's timing hasn't been particularly good. And then their linemen getting beat against the blitz, but even against four-man rush. And that's something that the Pitt offensive line really has the ability, I think, to play better, although they have a very tough matchup this week. As far as tight end, I expect to see a lot of Will Gregg, the graduate transfer from Arkansas. Grant Kerrigan, who's a redshirt freshman from Pine Richland, who's a big guy, really blocks well, but he's got soft hands. He's not the most athletic tight end, but he can certainly be a weapon in the passing game too. I expect to see a lot of those too. I don't really feel that Pitt is going to miss any bit of production without Tyler Sear in the offense, mostly because he hasn't been a big part of the offense, and that was part of apparently the issue. But what they will miss is the depth. They've now gone from having 3 tight ends that they feel like can play a good bit to 2 and kind of a half, I guess, with Jimmy Medore, a former walk-on linebacker who they moved to tight end before the year, did put him on scholarship. He also plays some fullback, H-back. He can play a good bit if they need him to as well. But Pitt's tight ends have mostly been blocking forces, and I think Kerrigan and Medore certainly can do that. And Gregg provides greater offensive upside than Sear ever did. So if they want to use the tight end in a throwing role, maybe him, or maybe just use Aaron Matthews lined up alongside a tackle for that role if they need it. I think Pitt will be fine on defense as well, even missing Quentin Virginis, because the nickel look that they've used as their primary defense for the past 2 weeks has minimized the number of linebackers they're using. They're only down to 2. And I think they still have good players there. They don't have a player that's played as well as Quentin Virginis this year, but Sean Idowu, Elijah Zeiss, Salim Brightwell are 3 very experienced, very talented players that can do everything that Virginis was doing. And they've got Elias Reynolds, who's a young redshirt sophomore middle linebacker that they really like, that's really been coming on sort of as Virginis' understudy and is now going to be thrust into a bigger role. And there's plenty of depth there, too. Chase Pine, a very good pass rusher, probably Pitt's strongest linebacker, a real big guy. They've played him on the line at end as well, but I'd expect him to have an impact. And Cam Bright has been playing pretty well while Anthony McKee has been banged up in a backup role too. And they've got other guys, a couple other redshirt freshmen in Albert Tucker and Kyle Nunn that they like a good bit. So there's plenty of options there, and I think plenty of talented options. I think Pitt will be just fine at linebacker, especially against a team like Notre Dame, where, again, they're probably going to be playing a lot of nickel, and that it's going to minimize the loss. So a big game for the Panthers, and I think it's important for Pitt fans to remember, ultimately, somewhat meaningless game for the Panthers. I mean, if they lose this game, it's a game they're expected to lose. It's the number 5 team in the country. It's not going to hurt them in ACC play, where they're 2-1 and still control their own destiny. I think the thing that would make a lot of Pitt fans probably feel better about a loss would be if it's just a better game than the two whitewashings against Penn State and Central Florida. If Pitt can keep this game close, stay in the fourth quarter, maybe come up a play away from winning this game, put themselves into that position, whether they eventually win it or lose it, I think Pitt fans will be feeling a lot better about the program than they are right now, and certainly were 2 weeks ago coming off that Central Florida loss. Lastly, I want to talk about the Dukes and the Colonials, FCS football on the Bluff. And I looked this up because I thought it was interesting. There will be 62 former WPIAL players on the sidelines for that game. It's essentially a WPIAL all-star team. Now, both schools do recruit outside of Western Pennsylvania, but it's a ton of local players up there. It's going to be under the lights, 7 o'clock, Rooney Field. And, you know, if you've been following our coverage of the Duquesne football team at all, you know they're going through a tough period right now. The loss of sophomore running back Marquise Brown last week has certainly stuck with the team at funeral services for him on Sunday on campus. And then the guys got back to work this week. And of course, they lost the game Saturday while dealing with that, a close, kind of a heartbreaking game. I just actually spoke with Duquesne head coach Jerry Schmidt before the show, and he said the guys are getting back to a sense of normalcy. But this is a big game because it's a crosstown rival, and Robert Morris is a team somewhat on the rise under first-year head coach Bernard Clark. They certainly seem to have fixed a lot of the issues that team had on offense over the last several years, and they've really done a better job of being competitive and playing a more mistake-free, watchable football than they had in the past few years. And so it should be a big game. It should be an exciting game. And like I said, all these guys that you've seen play their high school careers here, what an opportunity. So I know the Panthers are on the road. They're playing during the day. If you're a fan of high school football in the area, if you're a fan of college football, but haven't seen those teams, great opportunity to check it out. Tickets are pretty cheap for the Dukes too, so it's a cheap date. And it's supposed to be beautiful fall, so bring a jacket. But finally, feels like fall out here. It's football weather, and it should be a beautiful night on the Bluff. So I strongly recommend checking that out. All of our coverage for Pittsburgh Sports Now this weekend, and tonight, Steve Brenner will be at Seneca Valley. They've got Woodland Hills, late season non-conference matchup. Kind of an important one here as the Wolverines are scratching and clawing to find their way into a playoff spot. Seneca Valley looking to fine-tune some things. Not so thrilled with the way they've played over the last 2 or 3 weeks heading into their playoffs. Saturday afternoon, Steve Rothstein, my understudy for Pitt football, has the Panthers and the Irish. I actually will be out of town this weekend, so give Steve a follow at Steve Rothstein on Twitter and make sure to look for his stories from Indiana. He's a great young reporter, and we're expecting great coverage out of him. Parker Hurley, who also has done a fantastic job all season for Pittsburgh Sports Now, will have we call it the county game in basketball. I guess we can call it that for football. Robert Morris and Duquesne, they're not playing in basketball anymore. So this is the only shot for the Colonials to knock off the Dukes this year. And then, of course, Sunday, 1 o'clock, Steelers, Bengals, and that one's in Cincinnati. That's it for me for this week. I'd like to thank Beaver County Auto, who sponsors our studio here, for their support. And again, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, let us know what you like, what you don't like, what type of videos you'd like to see from myself and the rest of the crew here at Pittsburgh Sports Live. We really appreciate you watching. And until next week, I'm Alan Saunders. This is the Friday Football Show. Thanks.